Welcome to this Yes Shettleston public meeting. My name is Gail Lithgow and I'm here on behalf of Yes Glasgow to chair the meeting. We're very lucky with our line-up tonight of speakers. We've got Blair Jenkins, who's the Chief Executive of Yes Scotland, on my left. On my far left I've got Christine McKelvey, MSP. On my near right I've got Carolyn Leckie from Women for Independence, and then on my far right, although that doesn't at all mean anything about your political opinions, we've got Andrew Wilson from Labour for Independence, so definitely not far right. Well, thanks very much for turning out. I'm really impressed by the number of people that have made it out on a Monday night to come in and speak, and I'm even more impressed that I don't really know too many people in the audience, so thank you so much for coming out. This is obviously a very, very, very big year for Scotland, and we've got less than 6 months to go until the referendum. So if you're sitting in the audience and you're undecided about how you want to vote, please ask the panel members your questions after they've had a wee chance to kind of give you their reasons or their introduction to the campaign and why they're voting yes. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Blair Jenkins. Now, Blair Jenkins, who I said is the Chief Executive of Yes Scotland, but he's also one of the most experienced people in broadcast in Scotland, and no doubt some supporters may have questions for him about the Scottish media. But he was Director of Broadcasting at Scottish Television and Head of News and Current Affairs at both STV and the BBC. But more importantly, Blair's never been a member of any political party, and he's never been involved in politics before. And I think that really highlights what this campaign is about, that it's not about politicians or political parties. So without further ado, Blair.
Thanks, Gail. A great pleasure being here. I'll just ask somebody at the back. Is that loud and clear enough right at the back there? Smashing. Okay, good stuff. What an exciting year this is. What a fantastic time to be alive and campaigning in Scotland. What a fantastic opportunity we have as a country to really make a difference this year. As Gail was saying, this is a very unique event in Scottish life, and it's bringing in lots and lots of people who've never been involved in politics, who've never been in a political party, but who realise that this is an opportunity to really make a difference. So many of us nowadays, so many people nowadays, I think, have been told by people in positions of power at Westminster and elsewhere, effectively, that you can't make a difference anymore. The big trends are all global trends, and nothing you do really makes a difference. Well, what this campaign is telling you is this year you can make a difference in Scotland. We can all make a difference. One little act on the 18th of September, one cross against a yes. If enough of us do that little thing, then a very, very big thing is going to happen. Scotland's going to be independent, and that gives us all kinds of opportunities. Good idea always, I think, to start a public meeting like this with a little bit of audience participation. So nothing too strenuous, don't worry about it. But I'd like to ask a question that I've been asking around Scotland, and I'd like to ask it tonight, if I may. You'll all have a circle of family and friends and workmates and colleagues and people you socialise with and go to the football with or whatever else. And whatever you're currently thinking right now about where you are in this debate, whether you're yes or no or still thinking about it, I'd just like to ask you a question. That is, of the people you know in that circle of acquaintance, do you know anyone who was thinking of voting yes, who was planning to vote yes, and has now changed their mind and is going to vote no? Could you stick up your hand if you know someone in that category who was going to vote yes, but is now going to vote no? I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 hands up there. I think that might be a fifth hand, I'm not sure. 5 hands. So I'll turn the question around the other way. You'll see where I'm going with this. Can I ask you the question the other way around, which is, of the people you know in your own circles of family, friends and so on, do you know anybody who was saying they're probably going to vote no, and are now saying they're going to vote yes? That's about half the hall, I would say. That's about half the folk in the hall. Can I tell you, I've been asking that question in every public meeting I've done right around Scotland for the last 2 years, and that is always the response I get. Normally, it's 1 or 2 people in the hall know someone who's moving from yes to no. Sometimes there's no one in the hall in that category. Always at least a third to a half. Is that not too? Okay.
It's too tall.
Right. Is that better? Aha. That feels better. Right. Okay. Normally, at least a third to a half of people in the hall know folk who are moving from no to yes. I mean, it can get as high as 70 to 80% of people. But the general gist of it is true, which is that the only one direction of travel in this campaign is towards yes. There is no other direction of travel, effectively. People are moving to yes. You'll see that now in the opinion polls, you'll see it in the way that the campaign's being reported, but we know it from the work that we're doing around Scotland, the feedback we get from all the very many people who are working for yes right around the country. So, at the point at which we become independent, sometimes you'll hear from people on the other side of the argument that the trend is not towards independence, it's towards greater interdependence, cooperation between countries. The fact of the matter is that at the end of the Second World War, there were about 50 independent nations in the world, 50 independent countries. As of now, there are about 200. The long-term trend is actually towards self-determination. It's towards countries taking charge of their own destiny, taking charge of their own affairs. Scotland is just the latest country to move down that particular road. I think my colleagues on the platform, I'm sure, are going to talk a bit about the arguments, the case for Scottish independence from their own political perspective, and you've got three different political traditions represented on the platform tonight. So let me just say very briefly, I'll just say something very briefly about the difference between the two campaigns, between the Yes campaign and the No campaign. And I think this is beginning to be picked up by everybody, beginning to be realised and talked about and discussed quite a bit. First off, we're a real campaign. We actually do have a grassroots campaign right around the country. The No campaign is essentially three political parties. In all the debates I've done, in all the public meetings I've taken part in, I've only ever come up against full-time politicians, payroll politicians, career politicians, people who are full-time with whatever political party they represent. You don't get the network of volunteers, you don't get the activities, you don't get that fantastic energy we have on the Yes side. All of the energy, all of the ideas, all of the forward thinking about what kind of country Scotland could be and should be is coming from the Yes side of the argument. And it's coming from people of lots of different points of view. There's a very strong green perspective in the Yes movement. There's a very strong socialist perspective. There's a growing perspective from people who are from the business community. That's a very strong strand of the Yes campaign now. Business for Scotland and various other business figures who want to campaign for a Yes vote. So we're a very diverse, many-headed, multicultural campaign with all sorts of people working for a Yes. There's only two things we have in common, and there's only two things that we ask of people. One is that you are going to vote yes and you believe in Scottish independence, and the other is that you subscribe to basic democratic principles, you believe in democracy. Provided you tick those two boxes, we're happy to have you involved. It doesn't matter where you stand politically. We just want you to support independence, support democracy. Democracy in Scotland will be strengthened by a Yes vote. So something very special is happening around the country. All this activity, we had a fantastic launch at the weekend for Generation Yes, the new young people and students campaign for independence. Again, there's no equivalent really on the other side. There are so many things happening on the Yes side with bodies like National Collective, the Arts Collective, which is a very, very strong part of the Yes movement now. I mentioned Business for Scotland, which is very, very strong. There are umpteen different strands to this movement beyond the official Yes Scotland campaign. There's a lot of energy and a lot of ideas and a lot of buzz. So you'll hear a lot of talk tonight about the case for independence, which is a very, very strong one, and we'll all be very happy to answer questions in due course. But I do think that one of the most important things to believe in life is that in an uncertain world where nothing is for certain, the best way to predict your own future is to create your own future. And I very firmly believe that on the 18th September this year, the people of Scotland will vote to create their own future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Blair. And just to emphasise again just how diverse this campaign, our next speaker will be Carolyn Leckie for Women for Independence. Now, Women for Independence were set up about over a year and a half ago in order to make sure women's voices were heard in the campaign, which is very important given the vast inequality that still exists between men and women today. And well done to the organisers of tonight for ensuring, when they were thinking about what kind of panel would appeal most to people who are coming tonight, that they made sure that it was very well balanced in terms of gender. Now, Carolyn is someone that I've come to admire an awful lot since I've got to know her when we set up Women for Indie quite a year and a half ago. Carolyn's a former MSP, but she's so much more than that. She's a daughter of a shipyard worker, she was a midwife and a former union leader. She's got a great deal of experience and understanding about the problems facing women and workers in the UK today. So take the stage, Carolyn. Thank you.
That's a wee bit high for me. Women for Independence has been a brilliant experience for some of the reasons that Gail has described, and I've met a lot of women that I've grown to admire too. And Women for Independence was set up to ensure that the 52% of Scotland's population had a voice in this referendum, were powerful in this referendum, and would definitely not be ignored in this referendum. And that's not just important for women to hear, because if you do want independence, then it's essential that the current gap in support for independence between men and women is bridged. And that's everybody's responsibility. Women for Independence has been concentrating on listening to women, creating spaces for women to be heard in the independence debate so far. But we are now moving on to talk about and try and persuade women who are not yet supporting independence why they should vote for independence. And often the pressure is on those supporting independence to put detail on what a future Scotland would look like. Dot the I's, cross the T's, tell us all the numbers. Which sometimes betrays a fundamental misunderstanding about what independence is. There is a difference between power and policy. And what the policy is in a future independent Scotland is up to you and me, depending on the political parties that you vote for. What you will have are choices. And I think that an independent Scotland is more likely to take choices that are in the interests of women and those who are low paid and the most excluded in our society, who quite honestly have been absolutely hammered by the Westminster government, and not just the current one. And I want to specifically talk about that, because sometimes I think the UK gets off the hook. One of the slogans is UK OK. I don't think the UK is OK. This isn't good enough for me. It's not good enough for my daughters. When I grew up in the Gorbals in Castlemilk, moved up to Castlemilk, ice inside the windows and one fire in the living room, and signed on at Rutherglen Jobs Centre when I was 16 in 1981, 2 years after Thatcher came to power, 2 years after the sellout of the first devolution referendum. I assumed that things must possibly, surely be better for any children that I have in the future. I'm now looking at the situation where I'm better off than my daughters. And I'm looking at the prospects for life within the UK for my daughters. And I'm really seeing something that's an extremely risky future. So you want to talk about risk, think of the risk of staying with the UK, which is more than likely to return successive Tory governments. We might even end up with somebody like Nigel Farage or Boris Johnson as the Prime Minister. And this government has specifically attacked women, and I think ideologically. It's had a freeze on child benefit and excluded child benefit from a section of women. The whole principle of an independent income for women has been dismantled. Something that my mother's generation fought for, to ensure that never were they supposed dependent on a man for their income or to be able to feed their children. Now, this government, as well as the child benefit, they've reduced child tax credits and the child care element. They have introduced a benefit cap which disproportionately affects women, particularly if they have children and particularly if they're single parents. This has taken women back to a time where they had to stay with a man whether they liked him or not. That's not good enough for a future for my daughters. And I think sometimes we have to remind ourselves about what power the Scottish Parliament actually has. I think in a lot of ways the Scottish Parliament, there's a lot of things the Scottish Parliament has done that I would disagree with, and there's a lot that I would have liked it to have done better. No doubt about it. But I think it's been quite successful, and actually it's lulled people into a false sense of security, and I think people generally think it's got more power than it actually has. So I think it's worth reminding us what is actually retained by Westminster and can only be given by Westminster. We can't go and take something off the shelf and say, well, I quite fancy that power, we'll have it. We don't have the power to do that. Only Westminster can actually give us it. That's a fundamental inequality. It's fundamentally undemocratic. For example, we've talked about welfare. Last week, there was a vote in the House of Commons where the Tories proposed an overall benefit cap, an overall spending, not just the cap on individual families being able to get benefits, but a cap on overall spending, at a time when 5 families in the whole of the UK own the same as the bottom 20% of the entire population. And yet people existing on benefits are the target. Why are people at the 5 families? How many millions or billions can you possibly need? Get off it. We don't have the power to change the taxation system or the benefits system to reverse that. We don't have the power to redistribute wealth. We don't have the power to take absolutely disgusting levels of wealth off of people and give it to people who are most in need. We don't have it. Financial services would be another example. How many people have had to take out payday loans at exorbitant interest rates? How many people have had to use organisations like Bright House at exorbitant interest rates and they phone all your pals if you miss a payment to embarrass you? We don't have control over financial services. We don't have control over interest rates. The Scottish Parliament can do nothing about financial services in the Bright Houses and the Wongas of this world. And we can only do something about that with the power. And we will only get that power through independence. Because there's nothing on offer, nothing from any of the mainstream Westminster parties. Welfare is not on offer. Any semblance of real power over taxation is not on offer. Financial services is not on offer. Control over employment legislation, equality legislation itself for women is not on offer. If we had control of something like employment legislation and equality, there's been loads of low-paid workers who have had to struggle for years now, and some of them have died waiting to get equal pay, that have worked for Glasgow City Council, for example, or South Lanarkshire Council, having to fight their way through employment tribunals, taking out individual claims. First of all, they've got to identify whether they're getting paid the same as men or not. They've got to chase their employer to divulge that information. They've got to make an individual claim in employment tribunal, and after years, they might be successful. If we had the power over employment legislation and equality legislation, we could completely reverse that burden. That would be a political choice. But we could have legislation that says employers will pay women equal pay. Collectively, structurally, strategically, we could enforce that. Do you think, really, that there's a chance of that happening at Westminster? That's the question that you need to ask yourself. If you want a future that's based on fairness and equality and justice, democracy, do you really think it's going to come to Westminster? Because none of these things I've spoken about, and there are many, 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 many more. The devolved settlement at the Scottish Parliament is power retained at Westminster. The majority of power is retained at Westminster. That is the reality of the situation. The Labour Party have said, and they came out with a devolution commission last week, that they may offer some increased powers. But it's a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of what is possible and what is available. And I'm going to finish just on this, because I do think that because of the unequal relationship between Scotland and England, particularly over 300 years and more, that our confidence has been affected. And we've bought into these messages over many years, some of us, that we're too poor and too wee and we can't survive. It's not true. And think how much more we could do with those powers. For women particularly. The top 10 countries for women in the world are small nations of less than 9 million people. The Nordic countries are in the top 10, top 5. Number 1 is Iceland. None of those countries have any more resources than we have. In fact, arguably Scotland has even greater resources than those countries. But we have not had control over how they have been spent and the way that we would choose as a people democratically to spend them. And of course it's about choices and chances. It is about the political party that you vote for in a future independent Scotland. But how much more accountable and reachable will those politicians be when you can jump the bus to Edinburgh, you can look them in the eye, and you can demand that they're held accountable? If you go into Westminster and Parliament Square, you got lifted. So we remove a whole layer of bureaucracy where only 22% of the representatives at Westminster are women. So nobody can guarantee that women will definitely be equal in an independent Scotland. But what we can guarantee is we will at least then have the power to make sure women are equal in an independent Scotland.
A very excellent speech as to why Scotland can, why Scotland should and why Scotland must vote yes in September. Our next speaker will be Andrew Wilson from Labour for Independence. Labour for Independence is a very interesting group that got set up again over a year ago, made up of kind of either Labour supporters or Labour card carrying members. And this group really does highlight just how diverse, again, this campaign is. About a quarter of Labour voters are intending to vote yes, and a very large majority are undecided about how to vote. So that's just how important Labour for Indy can be on this platform. So I would, without further ado, like to introduce Andrew. Thanks.
Hi there, well, thanks for asking me along to speak tonight. I don't have quite the same background as other speakers because I'm not a politician. Before this referendum came along, I wasn't an activist, but my parents were in the Labour Party and in the trade unions, and I've always been interested, so I suppose it's in my blood. When I volunteered to become active in Labour for Independence, I thought it would just be giving out leaflets through the doors, and didn't expect to end up here, but we'll see how it goes. So, Labour for Independence is an organisation that's made up of Labour members and voters and ex-Labour supporters. We're just trying to argue the case for why independence is good for Scotland, but it's also good for the Labour Party as well. I think the party, people are unsatisfied with the sort of direction the party's taken in the last few years in the UK and in Scotland as well, and a lot of the traditional voters were not happy with the shift to the right. People say, I suppose, Labour had to shift to the right to win votes in the UK, and maybe in the UK that was the case, but in Scotland we didn't stop voting Labour, we didn't demand a shift to the right, we didn't desert them. And I remember it was the night before Thatcher's funeral last year, and I couldn't watch the TV or read the papers because I was just scunnered with all the sort of hype, and we're treating her like a national hero. And I was out in Drumchapel, out with my gran getting messages, and I walked into the supermarket, and there was a big sort of stand with all the newspapers, and beside it there was a box, and it was full of food cans of food, and it was for one of the local food banks. And it just struck me how unfair the society had become, because on the one hand, while they're celebrating the leadership of this person, she was in a way responsible for a lot of the problems that we're having in society today. This was the most unpopular Prime Minister that Scotland had ever known. But to listen to the BBC and the papers, you'd have thought she was a hero. It became clear to me that in this society, in the UK, what we think and what we feel doesn't really count, it doesn't matter. So While all this was going on, the unions are telling us we're better off in the UK, better off. But while they're folks celebrating Thatcher down in London, are people in Glasgow forced to use food banks better off? We're so much better off if for the first time in history the Red Cross are delivering food parcels to the UK in peacetime. It's just, there's communities in this district where life expectancy is now lower than people in the Gaza Strip, and that's the communities that Thatcher damaged and just left behind. So they say we're better together, but what type of society is it that we're better in? We're one of the wealthiest societies in the world, but we're also one of the most unequal societies. The gap between the rich and the poor is double that of any other EU nation. And we've got the second lowest wages alongside the third longest hours, and we've got the least workers' rights with the exception of Lithuania. Now, 1 in 4 children in Scotland are living in poverty, and this is amongst the worst rates in the EU. And it's not even our old people, they're the fourth poorest, so we're not better off. I don't think we sound better off. The leader of my party, Joanne Lamont, she's fond of saying that Scotland's a more fair society as a part of the UK. Fair in comparison to who? Not to our neighbours, not to our neighbours in Europe. We're at the bottom of all the league tables when it comes to equality and standard of living, but also for our economic productivity. How can she say that we're fairer, tied to the fourth most unequal society in the world? I think it's an insult to our intelligence. But Labour tells us it's an answer to these problems. Vote Labour and we can fix all this and there won't be any more destructive Tory governments. But the thing is, we've been voting Labour for 50 odd years. At every election we vote Labour and most of the time we get a Tory government. So what democracy is that? It's if you vote Labour in Scotland, you're more likely to get Tories than Labour. So I don't think that's fair, I don't think that's democracy. I think the thing is as well, when you do get a Labour government in Scotland, it's really when voters in England decide that's the government they want. And what kind of Labour governments do we get? We get bloody Tony Blair. It's just, there's a problem here. The political reality of the UK is that the voters in England tend to be to the right of voters in Scotland. So in Scotland, if you look at the surveys, you can see that our concerns are education, health and care for the elderly. But in England, it's finance, law and order and immigration. And Labour needs votes from English voters if they want to win. So the result is for us that when we get a British Labour government, they're not representing our values, they're not concerned about the things that bother us. They use the Labour brand, but they've got to be seen to out-Tory the Tories to get the votes. And then the party in Scotland's hands are tied because they've got to shift to the right on the orders of the HQ down south. So you get scunnered. So I think with independence we've got this chance to bring about a return to a proper Scottish Labour Party. I mean, it's not guaranteed, but we've got a better chance of making it happen if we've got an independent party that's not tied to London and this kind of shift to the right. I'd like to see a Labour Party that was going to build council houses and enact the bedroom tax, get rid of privatisation of railways and Royal Mail, and one that kind of listens to ordinary people. And it's what about the workers' rights and people getting exploited and young folk in these 0 hour contracts and you've got you don't get sick pay, you don't get holiday pay, you've got no one to kind of look out for you. I think I'd like to see a Labour Party that believed in the welfare state and was using the welfare state as a basis to build a fairer society. But instead the reality is, as a part of the UK, what we've had is a continuation of Thatcher's privatisation. They took us into Iraq. They're saying they're going to be tougher on benefits than the Tories are, because we're the Labour Party, we're not the Dole Party. It's just, they're committed to keeping nuclear missiles in the Clyde and they're committed to the Tories' austerity programme. They're wanting to force people into low-paid jobs or take their benefits off them. All they're doing is making cheap labour for big business. It's not what Labour's meant to be about. It's not the Labour Party that my grandparents told me about. It was giving dignity to working people. What happened to the Labour Party that gave us a welfare state? I mean, the welfare state was something that happened in the UK that we could be truly proud of. And it's been undermined in London by both the Tories and Labour, who in Westminster last week voted to back the Tories' welfare cap. It's just they're attacking the founding principles of the welfare state and they're turning it into something that's punishing people and judging them instead of supporting them. But there's another side to this, looks I'm being quite negative, but in Scotland since 1999 we've had a Scottish Parliament, and in that time Labour restored the principle of free education, while at the same time in London Blair was introducing tuition fees. And this has meant that it's been pricing young folk out of young working class people out of education. At the same time, down in London, Labour's backing the renewal of Trident, whereas in Holyrood, people from both parties voted to oppose Trident and to get rid of nuclear bombs on the Clyde, miles from Scotland's biggest populated city. It's a joke what's happening in the UK, but in Scotland we're seeing more change that's kind of more in line with traditional Labour values. We've protected the NHS, we've introduced free care for the elderly, and we've managed to protect the welfare state, which was arguably Labour's greatest achievement. I've just lost my place, 2 seconds. What I was saying is, it's really because I really do believe in the welfare state as a really good basis for our society, and it's because I care about the welfare state that I urge you all to vote yes, because I believe that the only way to protect it is through independence, and the welfare state was one of Labour's greatest achievements, so it's protecting one of Labour's the best in the broadest, so I think it's pro-Labour and pro-Scotland. Now, Joanne Lamont may tell us that Scotland is a fairer place as a part of the UK, but she knows if we want to tackle inequality and the poverty at the heart of society, then we need control of taxation, the economy, employment law, and most of all, our welfare. But she's ruled out any significant devolution of these powers because she's scared it might weaken the union. Ladies and gentlemen, if you vote no, nothing's going to change, and I no longer have faith in the leaders of the Labour Party to deliver change in the UK or in Scotland. But I do have faith in the Labour movement here. We've seen in Holyrood with its limited powers that Labour will deliver policies that are more in line with their values when they have the freedom to do so. Can you imagine what we can achieve if we had the full powers of a normal country, a normal independent country? We're at a moment in our history where we've been given a choice. We can choose to listen to no campaign when they say, oh, it's too hard, it's too much effort, it's too difficult, and you can't really do it. We could believe that, and we could just let them hold us back and not move forward. But you can choose not to bow to that, and you can choose to faith in our abilities. We can choose to build a better future, build a fairer society with a stronger economy that works for everyone instead of the few. A society where poor people will get a better deal. We can choose to take control the powers that will enable us to rebuild Scotland as a fairer society that works in the interests of everyone. All we have to do is vote yes. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I didn't want to say it before he started, but that was his first time doing a big public speech like that. It was embarrassing. Very well done, Andrew. Now, our last speaker before we open up to Q&As is Christina McKelvey, who is another woman that I very greatly admire. She was elected as an MSP for the Scottish Parliament that Andrew spoke so passionately about in 2007 before being elected again in 2011 for Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse. One of the reasons why I admire Christina so much is because she's campaigned on just about everything. She's campaigned on young people, on employment, on community regeneration and on human rights, to name just a very few amounts that she focuses on. Christina was brought up not far from here in Easter House. Before being elected to Parliament, she worked for Glasgow City Council social work. So, Christina.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's like being home tonight. Thanks for having me back. When I worked in social work, I worked around the corner in Brook Street. So this is not only a part of my home ground, but also where I developed a lot of my professional integrity. My very first flat that I bought when I was 19 was in Duke Street, just up the road. And I have still lots of family members up there who are still striving for a better life. But I want to talk to you tonight about hope, about opportunity and about belief. And I want to ask you a question, and I want you to think about this question. What's your hope for an independent Scotland? If you had the chance to have one hope answered, what would it be? Employment. I'm going to come to that. I want to ask you, what kind of Scotland would you want? I'm going to come to that as well. I'll just keep. That's two questions I want you to think. What's your hopes and what do you want? Because hopes are sometimes different to what you actually want and what you need. This is brilliant. This is brilliant, thank you. I'll tell you what I want, and hopefully... I want the run of time.
Transport.
I know a guy that's involved in transport. I've worked with him. But I want you to have these questions in your head and in your heart when I mention some things that I think are really, really important. I want a healthy Scotland. And that's a healthy Scotland from cradle to grave. That's the healthy Scotland that Andrew talked about. That's the Scotland where you don't have to have money to ensure that you get the best healthcare possible. And that's not just about getting healthcare when you're sick. That's about preventing illness. That's about good public health. That's about good education for our young people. It's about good support for our mammies and our daddies and our grannies and our wains. That's a healthy Scotland to me. An educated Scotland. A Scotland where your ability to learn is not based on your ability to pay. A Scotland where we don't have to spend £3,000 on our suits for eating. Because really, if we had £3,000 in our pocket, we wouldn't be spending it on buying a suit to go eating, would you? No, you wouldn't. You want a health, you want an education policy that again gives opportunities for children for their early stages in life to, my old ex-mother-in-law up the road in Duke Street who's learning about gardening and she's in her 60s. That's the type of education system I want. I want an ethical foreign policy. You can see all the young people in this room, including my two sons. I don't want to ever have the situation where we're sending them to wars that we don't agree with. That's the ethical policy. But I also want, you sir, an industrious Scotland, not just an industrial Scotland, but an industrious Scotland, a Scotland with a living wage, with an employment situation that pays for the work, that you don't have to be dependent on in-work benefits or tax credits. Let's just pay people a different wage. And you know what? They spend it and it goes back into the tax system and we get it back in other ways. Let's just pay people what they're worth. What about worker participation? I see a lot of my old trade union pals here tonight. It's really good to see some of them as well. All of them, not just some of them, but all of them. It is really, because I've been a trade unionist since I was a child. My father was pals with Jimmy Reid. You can imagine the household I was brought up in. My father worked in the shipyards, then he worked out in the steel industry out in Lanarkshire. You could just imagine the stories that I heard. I could quote you back Jimmy Reid and the rat races for rats and the whole lot of it. I could do it without even thinking. But that's the backdrop I grew up in. So worker participation, not just about trade union movements, about being on boards, about having women on boards, about having people on boards where they actually participate. That's how the Nordic countries do it. You very rarely hear of people going on strike in the Nordic countries because there's usually a workers' rep on the board of whatever private company or public company that's working it, and that's the type of worker participation I want. Apprenticeships. Apprenticeships are something that's really, really important. We stopped doing apprenticeships in 2006 and 2007 when the Scottish Government came into power. There was 13,000 apprenticeships across Scotland, and I have to say the majority of them were in things that didn't really address the skills gaps. So we changed some of that, and for the last 7 years we've had 26,000 plus young people go into proper educational-based, academic-based, worker-based, actually employed status-based apprenticeships in Scotland. And that's paying off now, because the figures for last year for the first cohort of 4 years that all graduated for their first 4 years as an apprentice, 98% of them went into jobs, full-time, trade-based employment. That's the type of society I want to build. A nuclear-free Scotland? Absolutely. I'll be at the rally on Saturday. I don't get to rallies that often these days, but I'll be at the rally on Saturday and then I'll run out to Hamilton because I have to open the Lawn Tennis Association's season, which I'll be doing. It'll be great fun. I'll probably trip there myself, but hey. But that's what we want. We want that nuclear-free Scotland, and I think we've got some of the marches coming through this area, so we'll get some information on later. A fair human rights-based Scotland, a Scotland where we don't have Theresa May telling you we're going to abolish the Human Rights Act, we're dragging ourselves out of parts of Europe, we're dragging ourselves away for the balance of competencies, we're dragging ourselves away for the social chapter in Europe, because it means then we could just demonise people on the front page of the Daily Mail and not actually tell people what their human rights mean for them. That's the type of Scotland that I want. A Scotland where welfare reform is about making the bit better for people, not about making it worse. A written constitution is something, and Lachie will tell you, I've known Lachie and I've known some people in this room for many, many years. I've banged on about a written constitution probably all of my life. Because see, until we have a constitution in Scotland where it writes in our rights and our responsibilities as citizens, then we've no moved for any further forward. The Next to, I think, China and Zimbabwe are the only countries in the world that don't have a written constitution. What does that tell you? And I'll tell you what I don't want, because Andrew, you were wrong. Your figures are wrong, because just in the past few weeks, the UK moved into the third most unequal country in the developed world. The third. The fourth was bad enough. No, we're the third. And a daft Tory was on Twitter thinking that was an advancement because he'd moved up the scale. What does that tell you? And in my role in the Scottish Parliament, I chair the European and External Relations Committee, and I get to meet some amazing people, consuls and ambassadors and politicians and just ordinary people from all across the world. It's one of the best parts of my job, other than the work that I do with my constituents, and talking to young kids at schools is amazing. But I speak to people from all over the world all the time, and I met the new ambassador for Iceland very, very recently. He's ambassador to the UK, and he was telling me this wee story about how Iceland has now started to recover. It's paid back its debt. It's now bypassed the UK and its economic growth. Not just its forecast, but its actual economic growth. But you know what they did in Iceland? They jailed their bankers and put up their child benefit. That's the type of Scotland I want. A Scotland of the Commonweal, and if none of you have managed to catch up on any of the stuff that Robin McAlpine and the Commonweal are doing on the All of Us First website, please go and look at it, because it's full of hope, it's full of belief. Every single part of it has been tested. And there's a wee bit of, just a wee pamphlet, and this is All of Us First, and I need to read it because it sums up everything that I believe in. And it says here, believe instead that what you can see with your own eyes. Believe that what others have done, you can do too. Believe that what others have achieved, you can achieve. Also believe that there is always more than one future. And believe that you have the right to demand that better future. Hope over fear. So, I ask you the question again. What kind of Scotland do you want? Vote yes.
Thank you very much, Christina. That's us heard from all of our speakers for the evening. I'd like to throw it open to questions from the audience for any of our speakers, particularly if you're undecided or you're not quite sure, and is there either something raised tonight that has made you think more, or if there's something that's been niggling at you over the past year or so with the debate ongoing. Okay, we'll take this gentleman here and then this gentleman.
First of all, has Labour not now become remotely wicked? I think that with the neck they're really coming from Thailand. They're not looking very great people. I'm on Labour all the way, but no longer. All the way that also, I'd like to ask, how involved will Joe Biden be in the writing of the Constitution?
What I'll do is, we've not got too long for, well, we've got plenty of time for question and answers, but what I might do is take several questions at a time, and then the panellists can answer the ones that they're most qualified or have opinions on. If you, sir?
After David Cameron and Alex Salmond signed the Edinburgh Agreement, with Night Follow's Day, David Cameron knew exactly what was going to happen. So why all the panic now from him and all his Westminster cronies, when they knew fine well what he was doing when he came to Edinburgh to do that?
Okay, jokes, and we'll take one last question from someone. Any ladies got any questions? We'll take this lady here and then.
It's about the fight. I know it's really really should want to be joined by the business that are relatively close by. Personally, I can
Fair enough.
It is being filmed.
I don't understand what is it, why is it we really need to have the coalition between the two, because if their backs were down again, will they not take us with them? So keep your pound, keep the head, and leave it in.
party. I think people that will be discredited is going to be the leadership of the party, the people who control the party just now. That's what we're trying to change. So it's not, as like I said at the start, it's not guaranteed you can change it, but you can try it, and if you actually become independent and coming up with presidents, so Labour's going to have to change, it's going to have to adapt, because what it's saying just now, the people of Scotland who vote yes will say they don't want that. So we have to look at themselves and think, how can we fix this? How can we re-engage with people of Scotland? It's going to have to start answering to people of Scotland. And I don't know, I don't think you can guarantee you can change it. It could just stay as it is. But if that happens, a lot of folks in the party won't stay, so you might see another party left coming out, because through independence, things are going to change, going to be shaken up. And Labour's been there for a long time, and folk have been emotionally attached to it, which I think still survives to an extent. And that's why if we could get Labour back to take Labour values, it could be a good way to deliver change. But if Labour's not going to do that, there's still a lot of folk in life in Scotland in the Labour movement that are going to bring change. It's saying that we should kind of rely on to make it happen.
I am not an expert on Labour, but I do think that if there's independence, it will open up opportunities for a whole revitalisation of democracy. And there'll be a realignment all over the place. I know that we were talking earlier, I've met loads of people that I have an affinity with politically, but before there's independence, it's very unlikely I'm in the same political party as them. So things can change, and I do think if Labour is freed from London control, it's his only chance actually of regaining some credibility. On the Constitution and people's involvement, I'm very interested in that as well. This is the beauty of this panel, because you will get a democratic discussion, because we'll all probably get different views. I do slightly disagree with the timetable in the white paper in terms of people's involvement with the Constitution, but I do know that there's loads of things happening already in terms of people participating in the Constitution that they want to see. And there's lots of examples of it being tried by involving people. Iceland was one. The mistake of Iceland was they didn't get the politicians to buy into it in the first place and say they would accept it, so the Icelandic Parliament threw it out after the people who decided that was the constitution they wanted. So we'll not be having that soon. And Ireland just now have learned a wee bit from that, and they're conducting a process just now which has got the buy-in of the politicians, and it'll be very interesting to see what the final outcome of that is. So we don't need to start from scratch, we don't need to reinvent it, there's lots of stuff there. I know that in the universities as well, and it's not just about the universities, they're academics writing papers, discussing it. There's been all sorts of different forums about constitution writing and all that, and it is important. Sometimes people go, like Christian was saying, and they switch on the Constitution. The Constitution is the fundamental thing that underpins any society, and I want a Constitution that's accessible, and if it is written down, and it's accessible, and it's quite short, and you can put it in your back pocket, and you can put it in your handbag. See when somebody goes to, for example, the homelessness department at the housing, and say, oh, I've not got any temporary accommodation. See if it's in your constitution that you've got social and economic rights, and that includes the right to house where you're here. You can pull that constitution out your back pocket and say, I have all bloody temporary accommodation. So it's a very powerful weapon, and the people absolutely need to be involved in it. On the currency, I'm quite happy with, I like Bobby, actually. Then we could sing about having a wee Bobby. But the idea that it's not possible for Scotland to have the pound, when actually Scotland owns the pound as well, and actually it's called sterling because it was forged in sterling. So we're entitled to an equal share of assets. And even if there's a negotiation and there is a currency union after independence, we have the power to change that at a later date. At the moment, we don't have any power to change the currency at all. When the Republic of Ireland became independent, it pegged itself to the UK pound for 50 years until it entered the euro. Do you know, so all the fusses made about it, it's just a bit silly, to be honest. I think that's it.
Yeah. Hand over.
Just very briefly on the point about the Labour Party, I think it's very important for all of us in the Yes campaign, when we talk about Labour, I think Andrew did it very well, to make a real distinction between the leadership of the party and the ordinary members of the party and the ordinary voters and supporters of Labour. I think the Labour leadership in Scotland and the UK are going to get the shock of their lives by how many Labour people are going to vote yes in September. All the feedback we get is that a very, very high number, a very high percentage of Labour people understand that this is not a party political contest. This is not about which party you support, which party you vote for. And I do believe that a very large percentage of people who would regard themselves as Labour people are going to vote yes in September. And when we win, and this campaign, this moment in Scottish history, is looked back on by historians in years and decades to come, I think one of the really big and interesting questions they will ask is, how come the Labour Party ended up on the wrong side of history? How did it end up on the wrong side of this campaign? I think it's going to be a very interesting question for people to look at in the future. On the currency point, the only thing I would say is I think when the Scottish Government, and as Gail said earlier, I'm not in the SNP, I don't speak for the Scottish Government, I think when the Scottish Government came out just over 2 years ago and said its preferred option was to enter a formal currency union with the rest of the UK after independence, a lot of people found it quite hard to get their heads around it to begin with. But then when the work of the expert commission, the expert panel went ahead and they reported, I think people saw that what had happened was a good faith exercise. I think what happened was some really well-informed people were asked to go away and look at this and come back with what was best, not just for Scotland, but for the rest of the UK. And it's a good faith proposal, it's well argued, it's been well reasoned, it's a very reasonable proposition that there should be a currency union, and there are good arguments for it. One of the main ones being don't add to the costs of businesses on either side of the border when we're just coming out of recession. But what's been interesting is the contrast between the way the two governments have behaved, because a very good faith proposition has been put forward and then it's rejected out of hand, very unreasonably rejected out of hand, without the UK government even meeting with the Nobel Prize winning economists who proposed it in the first place. So I think we saw a bad faith process by the UK government, and that became even more apparent at the weekend when it was disclosed, of course, that as we all believed, as we all knew, this is an entirely cynical exercise in trying to influence the outcome of the referendum in September, and it will all change after a yes vote. I mean, I agree with what I think the implication of your remark was, which is that after a yes vote, I think the rest of the UK needs a currency union with Scotland more than Scotland needs a currency union with the rest of the UK.
Labour, mortally wounded. Obviously I'm in the Parliament every single week, and I have to say, Blair's absolutely right, don't equate the leadership of the Labour Party with the membership of the Labour Party, because they're two different things. But what's really interesting is week on and week on and week on, and we're having many debates. We had a Conservative debate last week where they talked about the future of Scotland, but it was no future for them. It was I had the old Sex Pistols song going about my head, you know, I'm like in the UK, no future, no future. Can you sing it in tune? You're not allowed to. And anyway, I don't sing very well. But that's the point. When you look at the Labour's backbenches, there are actually some Labour members there who got up and speak in these debates and they don't believe what they're saying. And it's a shame to see it, because there's some very, very well-respected politicians that I know who have to get to their feet and say things that they don't believe in. And as the weeks go past and it gets closer, the more apparent it's becoming on their faces, because they're not happy. And that's a shame. On the written constitution, I hosted Thor, his name's Valdarthur Halson. He was the Icelandic guy who took the lead on the written constitution. I hosted an event here in the Scottish Parliament, and I made sure Scottish ministers were there, and I made sure special advisors were there, and I made sure all the researchers and all the policy people were there, because if Iceland, with 25 ordinary people, can write what I think is a fantastic example constitution, then we can do it, and we can do it when it's a civic-based exercise. Scottish National Party is talking about publishing the bones for consultation, and that means everybody can get their dibs in. University of Western Scotland, there's a student there, a woman in her 50s, went back to education late, comes from East End of Glasgow, who is doing a PhD on a human rights-based constitution. You can be damn sure I've fed that up a line, because it's fantastic. So that's my bit in the written constitution. That's something I will go to the barricades on and I'll be right beside you. The pound, I mean, we've heard about the pound. I honestly, I was out campaigning in Hamilton Saturday and Larkhall Saturday morning and Hamilton Saturday afternoon. And the Better Together folk, there was 6 in between the two areas, handing out that same leaflet about the pound, and folk were just laughing at them. It was actually a shame, because there's some nice folk that I know that are in the Better Together movement out there. They're decent folk, you know, but they were having to hand out this utter guff. And they were getting a hard time off people, because people are, you've read The Guardian, we've seen it on Twitter, we've seen it on Facebook. They don't think that people have got other means other than the negative newspapers to find out the information. And it was a shame, but however, I told them, you take the pound leaflet, then take my leaflet, because mine's is hope and theirs is fear. Westminster panic. I had, I'm inquiring my committee right now, the European External Relations Committee, looking at the Scottish Government's proposals for Scotland's place in Europe. And we had the Secretary of State for Scotland, or the Secretary of State against Scotland, okay, at committee last week, and he was absolutely pitiful. Now, if this man is the man, because I asked him whether he was Westminster's man in Scotland or Scotland's man in Westminster, because he certainly wasn't sticking up for Scotland when he was at Westminster or when he was outside Westminster. When I asked him, you know, what was he doing, his devolution unit, what was he doing to talk up Scotland, he could tell me that, oh, we've briefed the Russians. Yeah, that'll be when Mr. Putin said, "Niet." Get lost. So Westminster panic, absolutely. I got a panic letter from Alistair Carmichael today. I only received it today. The Sunday papers all got it yesterday, where he's having an attack on me. That's panic, obviously really, really alarmed him. More of that, please.
One hand straight up and back there.
I'm not all that interested in political parties. So if the Labour Party survives, I'm sure you'll do that yourself. SNP's already in government. I've voted in my life Labour, SNP, Greens, maybe a Liberal, might be in a bad shape. But I'm also a convert to voting yes. I wanted 2 questions on the ballot. I wanted to be asked that if you didn't vote for independence, would you have more powers? I'm going to vote yes for the exact same reason as I became a feminist 40 years ago, so I can control my own life. Christina said she bought a house when she was 19. When I was 19, women weren't allowed to sign mortgages on their own. They had to have a husband or somebody to guarantee it for them. I don't particularly want to hear about all the political parties. I want the argument why it's going to be better to live in the centre of Glasgow if you have an independent government. I want to know that I'm going to be able to vote for whoever I like after that, and that it's going to be proportional representation, and you're going to have a more just government that you can have at Westminster because they still have capacity. Everything else will sort itself out. When I was 19, I never thought women would have the amount of freedom that they now have. I hope my daughter, my age, which I'm not going to give you, she will look back and say, that was a number of years of controlling her own destiny. And I suppose from Blair, I would like to hear more of how are you going to involve people that are not interested at all in political parties.
Take the young man in the black coat. Yeah.
What about the majority of an independent Scotland engaging in currency union is to take a share of the national debt? So unlike what the Scottish deficit increasing to something like 8%, if I'm not mistaken, how will an independent Scotland reduce the deficit, which is clearly quite a problem at the moment?
Take a couple more questions. Yep. Guy in the blue. Okay, you yourself questions are here. Yeah.
If everybody votes yes, 2 years down the line, or 3 years, it's a failure, do we have a recovery plan?
Right. We'll deal with those questions first, and then we'll come back. Do you want to start, Blair?
I'll just move just the last point first, which is to say that I mentioned earlier that the number of independent countries in the world has gone up from 50 at the end of the Second World War to 200 now. None of them has ever decided or voted to go back. They've all stuck with independence, they've all stuck with it. And I don't think there's any prospect whatsoever of an independent Scotland being anything other than a very successful and very prosperous country. And there's no countries that have wanted to go back to being dependent on another or subordinate to another country once they've actually got their independence. I should probably deal with the first point that was raised, which is about engagement and how we get more people involved. It is one of the features of the campaign that I think we're bringing a vast number of people around Scotland who've never ever been involved in party politics before. I mean, I keep hearing that at every meeting I go to, every local group you have contact with, is local people who might be SNP people or maybe from the Green Party or whatever, will tell you just how many people there are not people who ever come to their party meetings or who are members of their parties. We are working very hard, particularly in communities where there's not a great record of voting. It's one of the unfortunate truths in the UK, I think, and Scotland's no different, is that because there's been such a loss of faith, such a loss of trust in politicians, largely to do with things that have happened at Westminster, a lot of people just gave up on party politics. And it's no wonder if you look back at, someone mentioned the Iraq War, the banking crisis, the expenses scandal, you've now got the dismantling of the welfare state, that people have lost a lot of their trust in politicians and politics, and that's going to have to be rebuilt. It's going to have to be rebuilt by the first government of an independent Scotland as well, because there is that gap, I think, less so in Scotland, but there is that gap between the population at large and the politicians who serve them, and we're going to have to work very hard to restore that and build up that trust. But one thing we've known right from the start, and I mean it picks up the gentleman's point about the media, we know that the way we win this is by the way we run the grassroots campaign. We win this referendum community by community, street by street, conversation by conversation. My first day in this job, because people were saying to me, well, that was summer of 2012, and people were saying, what can we do right now? What can we do today? What can we do right now? And what I said then was, if everyone who's already decided they're going to vote yes can persuade just one other person, then we win. That has always been true. And it's one of these things now that people let us know all the time that they've converted 3 or 4 or 5 people. There's a woman on Twitter the other week said she'd personally converted 26 people to yes, which is pretty good going. So if everyone's doing that, just by talking to the people you know and explaining why independence is the right option, I have found personally there are very, very few people who are completely and utterly against the idea. Most people, you can nudge them towards a yes vote. You probably know the first thing we ask people is to place themselves on a scale from 1 to 10, in their view of independence, where 1 is over my dead body and 10 is yes, I want to be independent right now. And people will actually say to you when you go back to them a second time or a third time, oh yeah, I was a 3 or a 4 last year, but now I'm a 5 or a 6 or I'm a 7 or whatever. And people can see themselves moving up that scale. We know people are moving up that scale. We know people are moving towards yes. But it's an ongoing task, and I don't pretend it's an easy one. But we do rely on the energy and the enthusiasm and in a large measure the creativity of local campaign groups right around Scotland, in every community around Scotland, who are just getting people involved, who are knocking doors, who are much more active and engaged than the No campaign are or ever will be. And I think that's the way we win.
I think Blair's absolutely right about getting involved, and the campaign that we've got in Hamilton is people of political parties and none, and some folk, just much like yourself, that want, a better country, they want a better chance, they want something a bit different, and they feel hopeful for that, and they come and get involved. We had a lady just turn up on Monday, and Saturday, who had read some stuff last Monday and decided she would just come out on Saturday and come along and talk to people. She was a wee bit shy, but she was fantastic, because it was just ordinary. This is what I want, and this is what I think we need, and this is how we should go about it. And that was really, really helpful, because people don't want to listen to politicians sometimes, they just want to listen to ordinary folk that are just like themselves. And that really adds to my campaign when I get many, many people like that. The bit about the sharing of the national debt is you're absolutely right, and as Blair said, the economic advisors that did the piece of work for the Scottish Government, come up with a good faith exercise in as much as we'll take your share of the national debt, you know, but what we're looking for in return is a currency union, and what you get in return for that is no, 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 you know. So, you know, whatever else Scots like, you know, we just keep saying no and you can sling a hook, you know. That's not what we want to do. We want to be responsible, we want to take our share, but you know, there's other options there. And we should look at them all and see all these folk who keep looking for plan B. There's plan B, C, D, E and F in the white paper, so maybe should just go and read that page. The bit about the mainstream media, I wasn't actually saying to boycott it, because I don't. What I was saying is that some people maybe on the no side think that people only get their information from the mainstream media, whereas people get their information from everywhere now, and that's why people are so clued up Saturday morning when they were trying to hand out their pound leaflet, because people were saying, no, that's rubbish, it's rubbish. You don't trust you on anything now, which was a key element in the message that came out on Friday night, is there's now a lack of trust. They'll say anything to get by. Failure is not an option. And I think anything the Scots have turned their hands to, you know, whether we're Indigenous Scots or people that's made our home here, we came to be educated, you know, we're out into the world, we've created the modern world, you know. Let's have a wee bit of that industrious and ingenious back for ourselves. And it means there's no chance we'll be a failure, no chance in ourselves, because we just won't let it happen.
I'll try and reflect on that point in terms of what would happen in 2.5 years. It was a failure, I think we called it. In 2.5 years' time, whatever is happening in Scotland will be because we have voted for a government that's done it, rather than a government that we've not voted for has done it. That's the fundamental difference, and we'll be able to change that government and get a government that we vote for that'll do it better. It's a fundamental democratic point. And, you know, if at some point in the future an independent Scotland wanted to join some kind of federation or confederation, it would have the independent power to choose to do that. The Scottish people would have the independent power to choose to do that. Apparently we don't. And where are the federalists? You know, we're told that Liberal Democrat official policy is to be federalist. Where are they campaigning for it? Where's the prospectus for a federal UK? It's nowhere to be seen, there is no alternative. And if in 2.5 years' time it's no the sort of country that you want to be living in, or I want to be living in, or any of us want to be living in, it'll be our responsibility. And there'll be nobody else to blame, it'll be us. And we'll have the responsibility to change it and make it better. On feminism, because you're a woman after my own heart, I'm not involved in any political parties now either, and that's the main reason there's many reasons I'm involved in Women for Independence, but I wanted to be involved in the independence movement. But I didn't want to do it through a political party. I wanted to be involved with women across the board because I was fed up, really, arguing in political parties for equal representation for women, for example, for women's voices don't to be excluded, for women to be listened to. So I absolutely agree with your point, and there'll be no future in an independent Scotland for women unless women were at the table. We're not campaigning for independence in order to hand it over to men to run again. No, we want to be there. And in terms of that written constitution, there's an opportunity, yes, for proportional representation, even more proportional than it is just now. It's not going to happen in Westminster, no way. Look at the failed AV referendum, you're not going to get anything like proper proportionality through Westminster. We'll also have the opportunity, perhaps, might have to argue for it, for 50-50 representation in the Parliament through that written constitution. Rwanda have done it. So there's lots of possibilities that if you were to go to a bookie and get odds for those things that you want likely to happen in Westminster, what kind of odds would you get? But you'd definitely get shorter odds if you were to put the same bet on with regard to an independent Scottish Parliament.
So we were talking about how to make lightweight betting folk in East End. I think the PR system, we've got a PR system in place just now, so we need to look at the record in the Parliament that we've had so far, and you can see that could be extended. I think the main parties are already talking about devolution of power after independence out to communities. We need to see more of that happen because we don't have the power to change things in our communities just now, and that needs to happen. It happens in most other countries, so I think someone mentioned earlier the common room. If you want to look into that, that's got proposals for how you could give birth to people and give local democracy to make change, like you do in Scandinavia. It's worth looking at. The thing about the media and the sort of alternative papers and things that come up online. I think the thing is, mainstream media, the newspapers, the leadership's fallen. So there's people sort of changing the way they get information, but I understand, yes, people will look to the main papers. But I don't think they're doing themselves any favours in this kind of constant negativity. I remember last year my grand saying to me, we're going to get chucked out of Europe, and then everybody could use the euro. And I was like, no, they're just expecting to confused. Exactly. But then I think people start to see through this constant negativity, and I think we can't really change it, but we can bypass it and find ways to get information out to people. You're saying this, going out and talk to folk in the streets, and you do that, folk want to hear it, they want information. If you've got it, then they're willing to listen. So I wouldn't get too, and it's frustrating, I wouldn't get too hard on it.
So I'll take 3 more questions. I'll take the chap in the red scarf, the girl in the leather jacket, and then this chap in the grey.
Someone asked a question about what do you do about people who are disillusioned with political parties. And my answer to that is the experience that I've had over the past year in the Scottish Anti-Veteran Tax Federation. We went out and built grassroots community campaigns in over 80 working class schemes across Scotland, and we forced 2 political parties to agree with each other and effectively do away with the veteran tax in Scotland. Now that wasn't out of the goodness of their hearts, to be honest. It was because they were forced by their constituents in working class neighbourhoods that they know they need those votes from in order to do it. So I think that sets the model for how we win the referendum and how we change Scotland in the process. Because there is a danger that some people think if we vote yes, then hopefully nothing will change. They're a very small minority, most of them are already elected. What we want to do is get new people elected and represent the views that are not currently being represented. We shouldn't have to drag politicians kicking and screaming into standing up for the poor and disabled and axing the veteran tax. But it was working class women and disabled people who led that campaign and who won that campaign. So what I think is we have to come up with a vision for how we can do things better than Westminster. What I say to people in the street when I'm talking to them about this is, they've set the bar so low you could easily trip over it. Yep. Now, that is the vision. The vision is things like scrap Trident, tax the rich, use the money to fund education, benefits, jobs for young people, apprenticeships, some of the stuff that's been mentioned there. But we also need to nationalize the oil. That wealth belongs to us. We need to use it in the way that Venezuela has used it to build a welfare state that's stronger than the one that we had before, and to protect that sort of thing. So I think if we put forward a positive vision, and I would put forward a socialist vision, then we're going to get the people that we need. Ordinary working class voters are the people that will win this referendum for us, and we have to give them something. We have to give them hope for a better future, for a better Scotland, and we can do better.
Brooks and yourself.
Also, what to the University of University, which is funded by Westminster. Is my pension safe and is one independent? That's what I want to know. Scarborough University is funded from Westminster. Is my pension safe now if I vote there?
Yep.
And everybody else in old age pension in this thing.
Did you not hear that question at the back? Okay, the question that was just asked was about his pension. He's being paid by Glasgow University and his pension. So what I'll do is there one more person that has a kind of question about what a yes vote would mean for them, and then we'll hand over to the panel. Lady of the Green Drop. To answer that. We'll go for one more round of questions after that, so we keep the answers as brief as possible so we can do another round.
Okay, so young people, well, I graduated uni a couple of years ago, so I think in young people can start their education, or getting free education still in Scotland, which is something they're not going to get in the rest of the UK. Young people are getting priced out of education in England. How do we keep that going? Long-term in Scotland's budgets are cut in the UK. Even when you get to uni, you come out, employment opportunities aren't here. Most of my friends from school are in England. They've had to leave to get work. My best mate lives in Norway, in Oslo, which is similar size to Scotland, and we both did the same course, and he's getting lots of employment because the opportunities are in his city. But people like to leave to get work. So having a country that's in control, this economy which can create work, is going to provide opportunity. It doesn't exist just now because we don't have the power to do it. So I think that's a change. If young people look to the future and a long-term future, it's going to be beneficial for them. With the energy, we talk about renationalising it, and I think there's a case to renationalise it. There's also a case that we've got renewable energy, different things coming out, and it would be better to get that maybe, instead of having it owned by one big, like 4 big companies, have smaller companies get involved in the energy and the public sector, different groups. It's going to reduce the sort of control these big companies have to kind of really float into having to pay these prices, and the government to intervene after independence to see that could happen. That's what I suggest. I don't know if it's in any government's, any party's plans just now, but it's an option that we could see happen.
Personally, I would like to see all utility companies take that to public ownership. I think there's a discussion about what public ownership would look like in 2014. I think the reality is that it's probably, in terms of the current mainstream parties, Christina might correct me, I don't think it's on offer from the SNP or Labour, and it's certainly not on offer for the Tories. But again, with independence, it just opens everything up to all these possibilities, and if there's a demand in Scotland, I mean, our opinion polls, from what I can gather, something like 70% of people want the utility companies in public ownership. Norway has its own state oil company. There would be some difficulties within the European Union in taking things that are already owned by companies into public ownership. I don't think they're insurmountable. And again, Norway operates within the European Union and has a big state-owned oil company and its own oil fund. So there would be choices. It would be up to the people, it would be up to who we vote for, it would be up to the manifestos that were on offer. And if that's what you want, public ownership of public utilities, and everybody wants that, and there is actually a political party that's offering it in a manifesto, then you vote for it. It's as simple as that. In terms of young people, my daughters are in their 20s now, and I said earlier, maybe when they were 16 or 17 they didn't think that things were that bad because they hadn't encountered many difficulties yet. They've encountered a lot of difficulties now, and they would be happy with the status quo and the current UK arrangement. And I met a few English students. I'm actually returned to uni, at Strathclyde Uni, and I work. I spoke to young students quite a lot, and there's a couple up from London, from the London School of Economics. And it's quite staggering how anybody can afford to go to uni in England. £9,000 a year fees, no grants, and to stay in the student accommodation for the London School of Economics, it's £200 a week. How is that possible? Now, I don't think the current situation in Scotland is enough. I never took the opportunity when I was in school at 16 to go to uni. But if I had, I'd have had a granny. I wouldn't have had to pay any fees, and I probably wouldn't have needed to get a job on top of going to uni. So there are things that the Scottish Parliament has done differently for young people that shouldn't be taken for granted. There'd be more powers, there would be more that the Scottish Parliament could do differently for young people. And again, I'd ask you the question, what chances do you think of it being better? Tuition fees have been proposed to be increased, again, in England by the Westminster Parliament. So you need to just weigh up your chances.
Pensions. This chap's question about pension in particular.
Pensions in particular. I've got a wee note here on pensions. I'll maybe talk you through it. It's a couple of pages worth at the end of the meeting, if you don't mind. But there is a triple lock guarantee. Your pension's safe. We actually take more money in revenue in Scotland and spend less on social protection. Therefore, we're in a better position to make sure your pension's fully funded. We don't agree, the Scottish Government in particular, don't agree with the rise of the pension age right now, because we don't think that meets the needs of Scottish citizens now, never mind in the future. So there's a few things there, but I'll maybe see you after it and talk you through all of it so you've got all the detail and maybe put your mind at rest. But there's many things there. On 16 and 17-year-olds, it's a really good question. I've got a 15-year-old, he's 16 in July, but the head off me to make sure he was registered to vote, because I had to do it because he's not 16 yet, has taken such an interest in his future, because that's the way he looked at it. He went, why should my granny get the right to vote in this and I don't? You know, because I've got a future here. She's got a future as well. She's not at all think his granny, but that's what his thinking was, that he's got a chance here to actually take the opportunity and forge a new direction for Scotland, and he thinks young people should be the bedrock for that, and I absolutely agree with him. And on the thing about tuition fees and all of the things that goes with opportunities for young people, there's a wee photograph doing its come on Twitter and Facebook right now, and it says, what if the cure for cancer is in the mind of someone who can't afford an education? And it's just such a powerful thing, because that could be you. And that's the reason why, as politicians, as mammies, as daddies, as grannies, as aunties, we need to make sure you get the best opportunity possible. And that's the reason why I think 16 and 17-year-olds should go out there and vote, because they should be voting for their future. Okay?
And I think just to add to that, I think one of the main ways in which we persuade people who are first-time voters, 16, 17-year-olds, about the case for independence is by actually having debates around the country. Now, you might know there was supposed to be a debate in this school right here this afternoon, which was cancelled because the No campaign couldn't provide a speaker. Now, that's not unusual. That happens quite a lot, that debates that we thought we were going to have, we're going to be able to take part in, have to be cancelled because they don't have the speakers. I'd hate to suggest that they have an interest in shutting down the debate, but that does to be like the way they're behaving right around the country. And perhaps it's because when we actually do get in front of young audiences, in front of groups of young people, and talk through the benefits of independence, we move them to yes. I took part in a debate in the James Hamilton Academy in Kilmarnock last week. We started the debate, and the audience were all in that age group, 16, 17. The audience at the start were 35% yes, 42% no, and 23% don't know. An hour and a half later, they were 69% yes and 31% no. And in all honesty, whenever we get a chance to talk to young people about the fact that we have more opportunities, more jobs, the current Scottish Government is guaranteeing either a place in employment or education or training up to the age of 25. You know, if we just matched the growth rate of other small European countries in recent decades, we'd have had tens of thousands more jobs in Scotland than we have right now. You know, I'm in the same position as Carla, and my children are all in their 20s. All three are working away from Scotland at the moment, and that's not because they want to. It's because the jobs and the opportunities, and it's been true for generations. There haven't been enough jobs and opportunities in Scotland to keep young people who want to live and work in Scotland gainfully employed in their own communities. And I think independence will give us a real chance to address that. Some of the other issues that were just raised, I think, I mean, they're interesting ideas, but I think things which are about the policies that we should adopt in an independent Scotland are things that have to wait until the election in 2016. What we're doing with the Yes movement is building as big a tent, as broad a church as we possibly can So irrespective of what you think is the right political direction of travel for an independent Scotland, you can get behind a yes vote. I think there's one thing we can say with absolute certainty about an independent Scotland: the one government we won't have is a Conservative government, and that in itself has got to be a blessing.
So we have time for, I'm going to just accept 2 quick questions. I'm going to accept them from undecided, so not people wearing yes badges already. 2 people in red tops in the front here. Do you want to, and then we'll quickly.
We all want a better Scotland, we all want a fairer Scotland, we want better public services, better transport, gas, electricity, we want better law and order. We hear from the speakers about all the same things that we want. We're talking about nationalising public transport, nationalising gas and electricity. What I really want to know is, how do we afford that? I'm a taxpayer. I'm paying enough tax. Yes, we want more social equality. We want to help the poor. But do we have this magic wand? Is gas and electricity, is gas and oil for the North Sea going to magic all these problems away? How are we going to fix it? That's what I want to know.
What's the guarantee that SNP or the Scottish Government can hold get the oil revenue from Westminster?
Perfect. Right.
Second point first, which is luckily there is no dispute over that, and it's not contested from the south. The precedent and the legality around the distribution of oil revenue is absolutely clear. Something like a little over 90% of the revenue from North Sea oil would come to Scotland rather than to the rest of the UK. 94.3, I'm told. That at least is one thing you can say with absolute certainty. I'll have a go at this other point, and then maybe other panelists want to as well. Nobody in the Yes campaign sometimes said on the other side that we think that independence is a magic wand. We will have hard decisions as an independent country. We will have tough choices to make. Nothing is going to be resolved just because we vote yes, but there'll be our choices. There'll be our decisions. I actually think it's more important at a time when when budgets are tight, when there's pressure on public spending, there's pressure on revenue. I think it's more important that you're making the right decisions, that you're not wasting money on the Trident nuclear weapons system, which Tony Blair, I think, famously described as a status symbol for the UK. I don't want to spend £550 million a year on a status symbol, thanks very much, particularly not one that's just a weapon of mass destruction. So hard choices, but they'll be our choices. And we know we start as an independent country in better circumstances than any country ever became independent before. We know we've got 30 plus years of economic data to show that we raise more tax revenue per head in Scotland than they do in the rest of the UK. We know we start life as one of the top 20 countries in the world in terms of productivity and wealth per head of population. So we should be very, very confident with the strength of our economy. Now, you're absolutely, we make our own luck going forward. We'll get some things right, we'll get some things wrong. But personally, I would back any independent Scottish government to make better decisions for the people of Scotland than any likely Westminster government.
I don't know if I can follow that actually. The whole thing about the oil is based on continental shelf, and if you've got access to the internet, just Google Scotland's oil and you will get everything you need to know from the McGraw report. It's a great read. Certain aspects here are better than others, and it will make you angry. How do we afford it? You're absolutely right. How do we afford it? Well, don't price the nuclear bombs. We have a situation where we have more people in work, so we're paying into a tax system, so less people need welfare, and the people that need the welfare get the best welfare. If we have a health system that I spoke about earlier, where we actually look after people from cradle to grave, when they're healthier, they're more productive, they're in work, they're paying tax. We can do this. There's absolutely no doubt about this, and we can do it better. And we can actually have a situation. Sorry?
Yep.
That's actually a really interesting point, because something that hasn't come up yet about whether the UK gets to stay in Europe or not is that to be part of Europe, you have to have your elected body, democratically elected, more members than your unelected house. And if we become an independent Scotland, there'll be more lords in the UK or the rest of the UK than there will be elected politicians. So we might have a wee problem in our hands.
illustrates that all the choices that are available and how brilliant it is that we are sitting in this room actually concretely talking about the possibility of having the power to take utility companies into public ownership. There's no way would you turn out, if it was a Westminster general election, to a public meeting with the choices that are on offer and actually be realistically talking about the chance, the power, the possibility of putting that policy on the agenda and people being able to vote for it? It just didn't happen. And I'm just going to go back to the earlier question, because I think that all the questions there have been able answered by Blair and Christina, but somebody asked why is Westminster suddenly panicking because they signed the Edinburgh Agreement and they should have known it was coming. I think it actually illustrates the absolute arrogance and the insularity of Westminster. I think they signed that Edinburgh Agreement thinking there wasn't a chance in hell that the people in Scotland would have the confidence and the assertiveness to be able to take this chance and vote yes. They were totally complacent. And now they're waking up. I don't know, I had the misfortune of watching BBC News 24 and Sky News on Friday night, right in Anarach, and I was flitting between the two of them. And they both had their newspaper panel discussions on at the same time. I don't know if anybody's ever seen it, or these folk that think they know what they're talking about. And there was a guy on Sky, and he said he was away somewhere for 10 years, you know, and he's obviously very much getting his views from a London-centric bubble. And he said, I can't believe this. I've come back after 10 years. And 10 years ago, I would have thought it was inconceivable that Scotland would ever vote to leave the UK. And then he started talking about the people up there. And so they've been caught sleeping, I think. They've been caught sleeping. And if you think it's been a bit negative and a bit scary and a bit dirty up to now, you ain't seen nothing yet.
It's a choices you make. I mean, you can see what the state is just now in the UK, that's how you ought to do it. Governments have people taxes, because wages are too low, so you need to do something like that, so they're getting people paying taxes and making our public finances stronger. So you can have a living wage, that's all the parts are talking about that. That's a way to go, that's a start. You have to take it further. And by the choice you make, move towards more high-paid economy, so you can fund things, but you can't do that. So the decisions you make, the reason we don't have additional decisions that Westminster have made to be in a low economy, that doesn't work. We can fix that. It's not beyond us.
Thank you. So thanks very much for all the questions. I think we'll have to start closing up now. I just wanted to quickly mention what Christina referred to, which is a nuclear-free Scotland is possible. They're walking from the Scottish Parliament to Faz Lane. They'll actually be going through Baillieston at 10 AM on Friday, if anyone wants to turn up and cheer them along. And of course, there is a rally at Faz Lane on Saturday as well, with a whole host of speakers, and there's more information at the back.
George Square.
George Square. Can't even read what's in front of me.
11 o'clock.
Yeah, it's assembled at 11 AM in George Square on Saturday, and there'll be a march and a rally at 12:30. So if you feel passionate about nuclear-free Scotland, then make sure you do turn up. So thank you very much for everyone for turning up this evening. I think we've heard from the panellists why Scotland can be a successful country, and very eloquently and passionately from all four of them about why we should and must vote yes in September. If you came here tonight thinking you were going to vote yes, or if you've been persuaded in the course of the evening, there's the ability to sign up to get involved. And it doesn't matter if you've never been a member of any political party before. I've pointed two young girls in the last couple of weeks to David Linden, who's at the back, to who wants to get involved and have never been a member of any political party. Everybody's welcome to get involved in this campaign. We have got less than 6 months to go to make the history that we have the opportunity to make on the 18th of September. So please make sure you get involved. Any time that you can give to the campaign or any energy you put in is very, very much appreciated and contributes an awful lot. If you're still undecided after tonight, you've still got about 5.5 months to make up your mind. There's over kind of load of information out there. For every question there is an answer, so please, please, please get in touch if you're still undecided. And on the 18th of September, we've got a choice of 2 futures in front of us. I know what a no vote means, and I know it means inequality, and I know it means no opportunities for people of my generation. Whereas if we vote yes, we have a real opportunity to create our own future and for Scotland's future to be in our hands. Thank you.